Hey everybody, this is Jurius Doctor, and today we're going to be taking a look at the year 2016 for our EVE year in review. I really should say that you should buckle up, because 2016 was a really big year for EVE Online, and there was a lot of material covered this year, so this is probably going to be a little bit of a longer video. I think to give it its due, we really should go over it in detail, so let's get started. 2016 brought a new game launcher and the addition of ship skins. The game launcher was great because it gave CCP devs an opportunity to show off the game, to introduce marketing panels, and to advertise the game in a bigger way, especially to players that are just getting started. It also gave the ability to show which updates were coming down the pipe and to show in a better, cleaner layout how to access different settings and to view your accounts you're currently logging in with. It gave better support for multi-boxing. It was really a nice experience. It also introduced, at the beginning of the year, ship skins. And the nice thing with the addition of new ship skins was that not only did you have several ships that had been remodeled, such as the Condor, pictured here, but also now you had the ability to break away from the standard Empire colors and begin introducing new color schemes, and as a vanity item to really, in a way that didn't affect any of your stats or gameplay, improve your immersion in the game and give you a little bit more customization. This also came in a bigger way with their ability to show that not only could they add colorful skins, but also introduce skins that had varying patterns or textures, and really took advantage of the new physical-based rendering around the models in the game, such as the Star Captain skin pictured here. It also took the game out of a model where you had a limited trial to learn how to play the game for free before you had to commit to paying, and introduced a free-to-play model, and that is the clone states of Alpha and Omega. So to explain for those of you who missed this, Alpha clones train at half the speed of Omega players. So Omega are your subscribing players, Alpha are your free-to-play. So they train at a basic speed. They have a limited skill selection. They have a maximum 24-hour skill queue that they can train, so you can put a maximum of 24 hours worth of skills into your skill queue. If you add new skills that will extend beyond that 24 hours, you can add them in, but anything beyond 24 hours you cannot add to. And you get a maximum of 50 skills training at any given time, and those skills are limited to the Alpha skill set. The Omega character trained twice as fast as Alpha, or at the regular speed of previously subscribed characters. You have an unlimited skill selection. You have access to every skill in the game. You have an unlimited skill training duration, and you have a maximum of 50 skills training from any of the expanded skill selection. Another big change that happened, although it came later, is that Alpha characters were originally only able to use up to Tier 1 cruisers. This was later expanded to allow Alpha characters to fly up to battleships in Tier 1 and faction vessels. They can also use industrials. In the same year, they introduced skill trading and skill injection. And how skill extractors and skill injectors work is that you start with a skill extractor. These are purchased from the New Eden store with Plex, or purchased off the market from characters who've purchased it with Plex. And a skill extractor basically allows you to extract skills from your character sheet and then take those filled skill injectors and transfer those skills to a character, or to reinsert them into your own character to move them somewhere else. Daily Alpha skill injectors are much smaller and provide a smaller benefit, but are much less expensive and available to Alpha characters so that they can inject and gain additional skill points faster than they would normally train. Now, 500,000 skill points is the maximum that you can fill a skill extractor with, and there are diminishing returns after 5 million skill points. Now, to give you an example of what I mean by that, you begin the process, of course, by filling a skill extractor, then you inject those extracted skills into a character, whether they come from a full-size skill injector, which can be broken down into 5 small skill injectors, or a daily Alpha skill injector. the maximum a large skill injector can be filled with is 500,000 skill points, and those gains by character advancement diminish over time. So from 0 to 5 million skill points, your character gains the full benefit, 500,000 skill points. At 5 to 50 million SP, you gain 400,000. From 50 to 80 million, you gain 300,000, and from 80 million plus, you gain 150,000 SP. So the higher your character skill base is, the lower the return you get from that 500,000 skill points. And this sort of bleed off for the higher players is what often makes it harder and less valuable for higher skilled characters to inject. Alpha clones can only inject full SP values against alpha skills. They can only eject against alpha skills, and alpha clones can use a maximum of 20 million skill points worth of skills, even if they trained as Omega or possess more. So if you were previously subscribed and your subscription lapsed, the moment your subscription lapses, you lose all but 20 million of your skill points. You don't lose them, they don't go away. You just can't access them. So you only have access to a maximum of 20 million skill points. If you're an alpha character who has never subscribed, you can train actively up to 5 million skill points, and then past that first 5 million, the only way to gain more is either to subscribe as Omega or to purchase and apply daily alpha skill injectors or small or large skill injectors to gain additional skill points up to the 20 million skill point limit. Alpha daily skill injectors allow injection of up to 20 million skill points, and the alpha daily skill injectors can be used once daily, hence the name, and they are a much lower cost. I think they're about 20 to 25 million ISK last I checked each, and they confer about 20 to 25,000 skill points if I recall correctly. I might be getting that number wrong, so double check when you're looking at the market details for that item. New server infrastructure. 2016 brought a whole new server stack for EVE Online, and they went with Lenovo, a very reliable brand. They went with clustered node servers and blade servers, and this new infrastructure, without getting into the weeds on it, allowed for support of bigger fights and higher populations and systems. It allowed for the expanded grid sizes we see introduced in 2015. It allowed for a dedicated reinforced node for JITA, so that JITA would never run into latency issues or would very infrequently run into those latency issues. It allowed for more ability to flex to respond to emerging events and large fights on the fly by allowing hardened nodes to be assigned to those fights. And it allowed more stability and uptime. We also see 2016 introduce citizen science in the form of Project Discovery. So Project Discovery was a novel invention of EVE Online and several university researchers where they were able to take their bioscience and make a mini game of it to take data that computers were not able to automatically recognize through advanced AI learning and algorithms, and rely upon the pattern recognition and problem-solving aspects of the human mind present in the player base, and use players to basically game out solutions to problems and identifications that scientists weren't able to arrive at quickly with computers, even supercomputers. Another problem with supercomputers is that you often have to fight for time and access to them in universities, so having the opportunity to have that task distributed and offloaded to a player base of hundreds of thousands of players was incredible. And the initial Project Discovery, the citizen science, was about cell recognition in certain samples, and it allowed, in essentially 9 months, for several decades worth of pattern recognition work to be done. And to give you an idea of how that was done, I could use the example of my own YouTube metrics. I mean, I am not a big YouTuber. I'm not a huge name by any recognition. And my videos don't get hundreds of thousands or millions of views. But every single month, quite astoundingly to me, EVE Online players watch in excess of 230 consecutive days of hours of my YouTube videos every month. It blows my mind. Like when I look at average monthly hours viewed on my YouTube videos, every single month I am floored And it is that ability to distribute a small amount of work over hundreds of thousands of people, and each giving 5 or 10 or 15 minutes or even up to 4 hours of their day to do a little bit of analysis. The pennies add up into dollars, and the dollars add up into fat stacks, man. Like honestly, in terms of the investment in time for these researchers to achieve these kinds of results on their own dollar or on the university funding they receive, it wouldn't have been possible. And EVE Online players did in a very, very short amount of time what would have taken, I'm sure, decades to arrive at. And this was sort of the seminal case for doing this kind of citizen science and for gaming everything in research so that citizens can assist with, furthering science. And it was really fantastic. It was a great thing. And there's a monument to it in the game that you could visit. Drifters invade New Eden in 2016. We knew about the drifters as early as late 2014, 2015, but they made their presence known in New Eden in 2016. We saw drifters appear and start engaging players in combat. We see a huge player initiative to try and understand the drifters' limits and their capabilities. They started invading systems. They started attacking and salvaging the decloaked Jovian observatories and started taking them down. There was a huge lore initiative to analyze the Jovian observatories and to scan them with Entosis modules to get information out of them, which eventually led to the ability to put together a narrative of what had happened with the Jovians and gain a little bit of information around the drifters. Really some fantastic lore events, but we also see the Empress Jamyl Sarum of the Amar Empire during a player event. Like, players were present at the event. She arrives in her avatar class Titan, the EF Seraph, and very promptly, during the player event, 150 drifter battleships warp in and doomsday her ship simultaneously, just basically dump DPS on her, alpha her off the field, and the alpha strike then is repeated in destroying her pod, and then the drifter fleet immediately warps out. So here is the Amarian Empress showing up in a statement of power, showing off her Titan, appearing with an honor guard during a player event with Auxiliaries present, and the drifters just warp in, popper pod, and warp out, and left everybody stunned. And that led the way for a huge response from the Auxiliaries, including the creation of the Upwell Consortium and the introduction of the Citadel. And the Citadel stands as the replacement for player-owned starbases, or POSes. And during the lead-up to the release of the Citadel to players, we saw the creation of Asterhouse exemplar sites, showing at various stages what the Asterhouse looks like being anchored, what it looks like building, and eventually being able to see the finished product, including a lot of the new features that the devs were going to bring to the game, including billboards on the structures, alliance logos, runway lights, holograms, showing whether the structure is in a reinforced or active and invulnerable state, and so on. And really, really fantastic art and design on these things. And then when they were eventually released to players, they introduced as well the Fortizar forward staging point. These are capable of having large XL ships, so you can undock capitals from these, but they will not dock a Titan or a Super. So if you have Rorquals or jump freighters or carriers or dreadnoughts, they'll dock up in a Fortizar. You'll also find that in high sec, low sec, and in null, Fortizars tend to be the focus markets for a lot of regions of space. That's where a lot of the player-owned markets exist. And then we have the Keep Star. the Castle of Nullsec, as it were. Not that you don't find them in other regions. In fact, there's one in HiSec in the perimeter system, but predominantly the vast majority of keepstars in the game exist in Nullsec, and they are the hardiest, the most powerful, the most defensible structures in EVE. Not to say that they don't die on a regular basis, but you definitely need an overwhelming number of ships and damage to bring these suckers down. And these are often the Alliance headquarters, the Coalition staging points, and the bases of operations for large groups. They're also routinely regional trade hubs, as with the example of the keepstars in 1DQ in Delph. And yet to be built is the Palatine Keepstar. It is the same model as the Keepstar, but with unique skin. It is also so overwhelmingly just objectionably expensive that it would take essentially 7 years of the entire market trade of materials in EVE Online to build one. And the first organization, Alliance, Corporation, whomever who builds it will go down in history because only one Palatine Keepstar can exist in the game at any one time. And in order to put up a new one, you need to blow up the old one. And the first time that this sucker blows up, it leaves behind itself in space a permanent memorial saying the very first Palatine Keepstar ever built was built here by X group on this date. It will be a permanent memorial when it's first destroyed, which I can pretty much guarantee is going to happen the moment they put it up. But they will memorialize themselves in the game permanently in the same way that Steve, the very first Titan, when destroyed, left behind a permanent memorial set in place by the devs. So it's going to be a really big deal when somebody can eventually build this. And if the goons aren't already thinking of building it, that would blow my mind. This new class of structures also brought in with it new structure assault mechanics, access control lists, and more. So structures were now able to defend themselves in a much more concrete way than with the POS guns of old. Structures also came with asset safety. So in the event that the structure was destroyed, it was assumed that NPC forces moved all of the contents of the offices, the corporate hangars, and the private hangars off to nullsec to safety in a nearby nullsec system in an NPC station. Access control lists allowed more granular control over who could access what and who could access the structures at all, and whether or not friendly or enemy pilots would be able to gain either reps or be destroyed by these structures. It also introduced structure fitting. And I can tell you that when Upwell structures were first introduced, and even so to a certain degree still, even an Astra house would chew through capitals. Like a lone carrier landing on an Astra house could get absolutely wrecked. Thankfully, they've been bounced past a few times since then, but they're still, in many ways, very, very, very powerful and potentially OP in certain areas of space. This also brought in new super weapons, new faction ships, and combat visuals. One of the first types of big super weapons was for dreadnoughts, the high-angle weapons, also used on Titans. And this allowed for capital ships to engage sub-capital fleets with pretty high reliability and really good application. And Revelations with high-angle weapons were a force to be reckoned with. The new visuals also brought in a whole other level of physical-based rendering and better optimizations around rendering during large fleet fights that really helped to make the game quite stunning during this period. We also see the introduction of Blood Raiders and other factions, supers, and titans, including the Malok pictured here, which is an Avatar class Titan, which also has the Blood Raiders benefits of operating a Nosferatu that will continue to drain even though your own ship's capacitors are full, which is just disgusting when you think about it. And of course, new overlays and new interfaces that helped with the piloting of large vessels and also general strategy in the game. Now, when it comes to the updated visual effects, the improved physical-based rendering introduced a lot of new features, including a new cloaking animation and new effects around armor hardening, armor repair, shield hardening, shield boosting, warp disruption, and ECM. And these are just a few of the samples. If you want to see a full list of all of the visualizations as they exist today, wiki.eveuniversity.org. The Uniwiki has a great article covering all the visual effects. Just Google Visual Effects Eve University and you'll get the page right away. And 2016 was also the year that brought in the Force Auxiliaries, also called FAXes. So if you ever hear somebody talking about FAXes in-game, they mean Force Auxiliaries. And the Force Auxiliaries were a capital logistics vessel, so healers, essentially, but meant to provide wrapping for capitals. Previously, you used to have to bring support fleets of subcaps, guardians or otherwise bazies, to help wrap your capital ships and keep them alive. This introduced capital reps, and the thing with this is that they gained big cap transfer and repair amounts. They had their own shield resists or armor resists. They had an increased capacitor pool, and they had special role bonuses around warfare links and triage. And this essentially ended the era of the triage carrier, and carriers were themselves rebalanced away from their triage role to primarily damage dealing. And a lot of people felt like carriers lost their way here, and that Force Auxiliaries stole a lot of the role of carriers, which, they're not wrong. And if you want to know more about these changes, you can check out the dev blogs, but you can also go to updates.eveonline.com and go through the various years of releases. I've essentially synthesized that down into a few slides for you. But Force Auxiliaries were a big change in the game. And let's talk a little bit about how ships changed from 2016 forward. Now, I'm going to paint with a very, very broad brush here. Like, we're talking a shop broom dipped in paint. I'm going to make a lot of assumptions here. Some of those assumptions many people will consider to be wrong, but I'm talking about the greatest number of people in the game right now. I welcome your comments in the comment section below. But let's talk about the different areas of space, and typically, again, broadest number of players here, typical ships that get used in each region of space. And then we'll talk about what FAXes did to the meta. So in high sec, we have small corp, solo, and new brews. Not to say that there aren't large corporations or there aren't large organizations focusing on industry or other aspects, transportation, whatever the case may be. I'm just talking about the greatest number of players in high sec, excluding skill farms. The average high sec player starts off in a Corvette, does some career missions, gets a free venture, tries mining, gets their first frigates, tries a little PvE, starts doing PvE to try to make money in addition to mining. Maybe they do some exploration in their frigate, they go out and do some exploration or gas huffing, and then they eventually get into a destroyer because they realize it's more damage and they learn the benefits and detriments of running a destroyer in PvE sites. Eventually they scale up into a cruiser, at which point, if they're still mining, maybe they get into mining barges. Mining barges are a great step up in scaling up your mining. And then eventually they get into faction cruisers to help them make more money or be better at PvE. And faction cruisers often get used a lot specifically for PvE and running missions. Maybe they get into faction frigates, especially if they start trying their hand at PvP or dipping into nullsec, or they want to duel people. And tier 2 cruisers really is sort of like the higher end of the average player's experience if they're subscribed as a mega in high sec, especially for PvE. Now, battleships, faction battleships, and tier 2 battleships tend to be the pinnacle of PvE, typically in incursions or in running missions. So faction battleships and tier 2 battleships will get used a lot in incursions and in running level 4 missions. So marauders will get used a lot, golems, paladins, and others for running level 4s. And this is sort of the broad spread of ships that very heavily get used in high sec. Add to that freighters and also the Orca, and you end up in a pretty good space for high sec. Now in low sec, in a much bigger way, you see all the same ships used in high sec, but there's additional ships added in that get used in a big way. And it's not to say that these ships don't get used in high sec, it's just they have defined roles in low sec. And the first of those is battle cruisers and porpoises. So industrial command ships come in a bigger way and get used in a much bigger way in low sec as a way of being force multipliers and improving the efficiency of fleets in low sec, benefiting from not only PvP, but also from increased access to higher quality resources. So orcas and porpoises have a much more fundamental core role in low sec because they provide boosts. And the same is true of battleships and command ships, which are command battlecruisers, in low sec. You also see the introduction for a lot of players for the first time of exhumers, so tier 2 barges, being used in low sec. Low sec is also where you see Tech 2 destroyers and tactical destroyers, or Tech 3 destroyers, being used in low sec. Fleets of confessors, Sipples, used for gate camping, command destroyers used for boosts and fleets, and strategic cruisers used in exploration, PvP, PvE, and Tech 2 cruisers and strategic cruisers will get used a lot in fleets. You can add to that also jump freighters, because jump freighters predominantly travel through low sec when moving places and into null. And you will, of course, also find carriers in use in low sec. And again, this is not to say that there aren't other classes used throughout low sec and that there aren't groups who don't use other ships than this. I am, again, speaking in the broadest terms. You'll also see Tech 2 battleships, but less marauders and more black ops. And the other class that you don't see listed here is Tech 2 frigates, in specifically stealth bombers, cov-ops, and otherwise. And those are typically used in concert with the Black Ops battleships for bridging and for Black Ops fleets. And that is very heavily used in low sec and in null. Now, when we look at null sec, you have to start with the assumption that null sec uses all of the ships used in high sec and low sec. What they add, or what they build upon at the large corps and null blocks level, is that carriers, freighters, and jump freighters bring in the addition of the Rorqual, which is the capital mining vessel at the null-sec scale. Not to say that Rorquals aren't used in low-sec, but they're not used near as heavily as they're used in null. So low-sec versus null, it's like, not to say that tractors aren't used in farms immediately on the outskirts of the city, but the further you go into the country, the more tractors are used, and especially at scale. Are we talking about a small hobby farm, or are we talking about the wheat farmer who has 600 hectares of wheat? So it's a matter of scale. Now in nullsec, you also see the addition of Tech 2 battle cruisers, so command ships get used a whole lot more in nullsec than they ever get used in lowsec. You see the introduction of the Force Auxiliary, the FAX capital reps, essentially, and you see the heavy use of dreadnoughts in nullsec as large damage-dealing platforms. We see supers in use and titans in use in nullsec, and both are used quite heavily. When you get to the point of scaling up as a null block or a large corporation operating in nullsec, the typical broad brush methodology in Force Auxiliaries coming into play, and the effect on the meta is this. Typically, nullsec groups will rat with carriers or with battleships or battle cruisers to optimize the ticks that they get, or the payout bounties every 20 minutes. From carriers and doing industry with orcas and barges, the next step up is to produce dreadnoughts for their force projection and force auxiliaries to keep their carriers and dreadnoughts alive. From there, they'll add in Rorquals to grow their industrial strength and to vastly increase their capability to mine and feed their production. Now, with the current resource scarcity pushed in by CCP, there are definitely some deficits in the game, both in Mex and in Noxium. But Rorquals, in a big way, with sufficient access to space and resources, can overcome this by simply mining as much as they possibly can get their hands on every time there's a cycle. Anytime stuff comes out, essentially, and site spawn. From there, having one Rorqual often allows you to buy 2 more, or build a second, or build 2 more. And multi-boxing allows you to run multiple Rorquals at the same time. So by the time you have 2 Rorquals, the path to having more FAXes and being able to have more resources to build more FAXes is much shorter than getting your first few FAXes. And the impact to force auxiliaries, of force auxiliaries in the game, is that you end up in a situation where a single force auxiliary on field can make a subcap fleet very difficult to engage, or make a capital fleet much more survivable. More FAXes, better survivability. And it turns the capital engagements and super capital engagements into a game of attrition where you have to grind through somebody's force auxiliaries before you can start killing off their ships, because as long as the force auxiliaries are able to catch the ships that need reps, those ships will survive. And of course, the more FAXes the more Rorquals you have, the more Rorquals you can build, and the more FAXes you can build. And so the typical progression goes Orcas to Rorquals, Rorquals to more Rorquals, Rorquals start pumping out FAXes. The people who are building capital start pumping out FAXes. More Rorquals, more Rorquals, more FAXes, more FAXes. And then from there, you start getting into super carriers. Getting into your first super carrier can take, 3 months, 6 months, several years of training, depending on how focused you are and your objectives. And typically, capital vessels are looked at by alliances as alliance assets in the same way that Upwell structures are. So supers is typically where a lot of routers are going, because the ticks that you can get off of super routing. And once you have your first super, it's a very, very short path in time to get to having multiple supers, to getting your first Titan. And once you have your first Titan, we're talking the culmination of years of training. It's the biggest ship in the game. It's the peak of where you can go in terms of industry and building in the game, and also for a lot of people, PvP. And if you have keep stars supporting you, you no longer have to dedicate that one character to being in that one ship. It's not a coffin anymore where you're dedicating your character basically to live in that thing. And in the example of, for instance, the Delve model, where the Goon Swarm has very tightly and intensively managed their space so that they can reap the greatest possible value out of it, like literally squeezing every last drop of industry and PvE from that space. From the time you have your first Titan to your second Titan might be 6 months. After that, your third Titan's 3 months, and from there you can basically just print them. And you may even find yourself in a place where, as an alliance or a coalition, you start looking at the really big prizes, like the Palatine Keepstar. Or taking your Titans and getting faction Titans, like Maloks. And that's a pretty big deal in the meta. And it had a lot of... it's a very polarizing subject. There's a lot of people who feel very strongly about it. Just like legalization of controlled substances. In EVE Online, it's not as dark a picture, I think, as some of our modern movies make out. But there was, for a long time, a lot of drugs in the game called combat accelerators, combat boosters, that improved your combat capabilities but had negative drawbacks. And for a very long time, if you took these in your hold into HiSec, the system marshals would show up and scan your cargo hold to see if you had illegal, drugs or contraband. And if you did, they'd blow you up. And with the legalization of controlled substances, that's no longer the case. You can take these drugs into HiSec and sell them. You can transport them, and you don't have to worry about forfeiting your ship. Other big things that changed in 2016 is the introduction of new faction ships and faction skins. New overlay features and changes in visualization of data. The development of a proper full-spec NPE with a brand new experience. And fitting changes, including the ability to simulate fits in the game, meaning that if you didn't want to learn how to use PIFA or FTE, you could just simulate in-game. And that one's a huge change. Like that, we waited over a decade for that to come into the game. And finally a dev said, you know what? I think we can do this. I think we can bring it in. They coded it out and they created an interface for it. And I'm really glad they did, because it's just as efficient as using PIFA. It's just PIFA has a little bit more functionality as well. And then, of course, the introduction of faction supers. And that was a really, really big deal with 2016. And these became some of the most sought-after prizes in EVE. In addition to all the regular visual overhauls such as skins and better lighting, better rendering, we also see visual overhauls in terms of how damage is represented and reported on your ship. We see redesigns of the barges, mining barges, and mining exhumers, including a rebalance which reduced their total number of turrets down to 2 each. Visual updates and redesigns of ships like the Slasher, the Maulus, the Bantam, the Executioner, the Griffin, and the Probe. And these were all ships that had major redesigns in 2016. And for the most part, with the exception of the Griffin, I like most of these. Like pretty much all of these stand out as good choices for me. And of course, with the death of an Empress, another must rise to take her place. Another monarch must step in. And in 2016, we saw, through the MR succession trials, the success of Empress Catiz Tash-Murkhon and her rise to being the leader of the MR. And she showed up with a massive, just absolutely massive honor guard that includes 12 Titans, almost 100 battleships, like 2 or 3 dozen dreadnoughts, all kinds of force auxiliaries, just absolutely disgusting amounts. And she basically established herself as a market power. And speaking of the market, we had better market visualizations come into the game. So where you're now able to see running averages and to see the movement lines in total volumes, to see the trends projected in a 2-scale way. So both not only what is the volume on market, but also what is the price change over time, price history, and the ability to explore the financial graphs in greater detail. We also saw the addition of the EVE mobile app, now it's in its 2nd revision, and a new character sheet. And the EVE mobile app allows you to manage your character skill training and several other factors outside of the game. And now they've recently added the ability for you to buy and sell Plex and Jita through the mobile app for mega characters only. And be able to manage your skills outside of the game is a big one. I would love to see them eventually make it so that PI runs as part of the mobile game experience, rather than having to manage it directly in game through my characters. And of course, they added a store element to the mobile app so that you could buy and sell in-game currency. And I believe it's 2016 or 2017, one of these 2 years, where they finally get rid of Aurum, and they combine it and they synthesize it down into just Plex. So there's also breakup in the concentration of Plex in terms of how many Plex you need to buy things. And the new character sheet really helped to expand your ability to look at skills in a big way and to look at your current character location, your security standing, your net worth, everything all represented in a single interface. It was really a nice upgrade. With the addition of FAXes, we also see expansions on our Rorquals, including the introduction of the Panic module, the removal of off-grid links, and a major station overhaul. Now, off-grid links were a big problem for a long time because you didn't have to necessarily have the ship that was boosting your fleet be in the same location as your fleet. And the Panic module allowed Rorquals to project a limited invulnerability field for a short amount of time as an emergency response to being dropped on, and this provided mining fleets and nullsec and low a greater chance to raise a defense for themselves rather than simply losing high-value ships right away. You know, give the cows a little bit of a chance to fight back. And then you get into the station overhaul. So a lot of the features and design elements that went into making Upwell structures as beautiful as they are were overlaid over the many different station designs in EVE Online. So all the NPC stations and outposts at the time benefited from revised visuals, which you can now see in game just by visiting any station. Now, when they took out warfare links, they replaced them with command bursts. And the biggest changes between warfare links and command bursts is that command bursts are scripted and they have consumables. So they are grid dependent. You have to be on grid with the ships that are boosting. They're called boosts. So warfare links used to be off grid. Now you're on grid. They have a limited range. They get boosted by certain types of ships. And they have consumables. So every time you use a boost, it consumes one charge of that script type. And they're scripted to specific effects. You don't get just one blanket benefit to having bursts running. And command bursts replace warfare links in several specialized effects. There are Tech 1 and Tech 2 varieties that exist. They are active modules, and they allow you to dial in specific bonuses to pass to the fleet. Those bonuses are also no longer dependent upon where you're located in fleet organization or the skills that you have. If there's somebody on grid with you providing these boosts and you're in range to get the boosts, you get the boosts. So there's less skill requirement on the receiving end or on the broadcast end. The skills are now focused specifically around the function of command bursts, and the roll bonuses from the ships contribute to that. Now, ships that could fit warfare links can fit command bursts, and the number of bursts can be increased by using command processor 1. So if a ship type says that it can fit 2 command bursts, adding the rig command processor 1 lets it fit 3. Now let's go through the different types here. So command destroyers have the ability to fit command bursts. They get a 95% reduction to power grid requirement to fit it, and they get a 2% per level bonus to the potency of those bursts and their duration. Battle cruisers get a 50% burst bonus to range. Command battle cruisers or command ships get a 100% bonus to burst range and a +3 level per level bonus. And capital ships can fit 2 and have 200% bonus to burst range. And depending on whether you're in a carrier, a super carrier, or a FAX, you'll get either a 1 or 2% bonus to duration and range. And then they come in a couple of different varieties. So you have armor and shield, information and skirmish, and these will affect things like your mobility on field, the amount of hit points available, whether it increases your net hit points or your resistances, and information can affect things like your lock time or your locking range, or your resistance to ECM. When it comes to industrial bursts, you get a 90% reduction to fit and a 2% bonus for orcas and porpoises. The porpoise can fit 2, the orca can fit 3, and the orca also benefits from a 50% bonus to burst range, a 3% bonus to mining foreman bursts, and a 1% bonus to shield bursts per level of the skill. Rorquals get a 50% bonus to burst range and a 5 or 3% per level bonus to mining foreman and shield bursts, and they can fit 3 as well. And mining bursts improve the efficiency of mining, but there are also Tech 2 versions that push that farther. And the same is true for all of the combat bursts. So combat bursts being armor, shield, information, and skirmish. If you want to know more about command bursts, you can go to wiki.eveuniversity.org/command bursts and read more about it there in terms of the specific nitty-gritty, the skills to train, and the bonuses and their mathematics. Now, Force Auxiliaries today have taken on quite a big change from where they were. They still benefit from the 5% cap transfer and repair amount and a 4% shield and armor resists. They get a 1% bonus to command burst strength and duration. And it's worth talking about this because command bursts apply differently than refer links. So when it comes to the roll bonuses of capital logi ships, they get 2 command burst modules. Again, you can increase this to 3 if you wanted, but really 2 is more than sufficient. They get a 50% reduction in CPU requirements for command bursts. They fit triage modules, which allows them to go into a triage, basically a siege mode. They get a 200% bonus burst area of effect range and a 200% bonus to Logi drone transfer amount. This is a big one. So FAXes have huge, just absolutely enormous drone bays. And having a 200% bonus to Logi drone transfer means that not only are you able to provide reps directly as a logistics repair vessel, logistics center repair vessel, but also from your drones. And they have the same capital penalty that was applied to all capitals, which is a 5 times penalty to Entosis link duration. So in a situation where you're dealing with ADMs of 4 and you're trying to capture space, at 5 minutes per level of ADM, a level of 4 would be 20 minutes to capture a node. In a Force Auxiliary or a capital ship, that is going to be basically an hour and 40 minutes to take over a node as opposed to 20 minutes. And that was their way to discourage people from just showing up with Rorquals and Entosising. And it can only online 1 capacitor booster module. This one is a recent change. It used to be that you could have 2 and be able to persistently inject and constantly keep your rep systems alive by having 2 capacitor boost, capital size capacitor boost modules, and be able to basically put Navy Cap 3200s through your capacitor persistently was really overpowered. And I mean, like, to give you an idea of how tough a Force Auxiliary is, even shield Force Auxiliaries, I saw a Minakawa, which is the Caldari Force Auxiliary, take 2 direct doomsday weapon strikes from Titans sequentially, one after the other, and live. And if that doesn't spell overpowered to you, I don't know what does. But recent resistance changes in EVE Online, reducing the effectiveness of ship resists from modules and reducing the number of capacitor boosters that could be fit on Force Auxiliaries, has made them a little less OP. They're still pretty OP, but they're a little less so now. And on the right-hand side here, you can see the visual effect of a Force Auxiliary and triage. I mean, I think it looks really cool. But they're still the resistance war on fleets. Like, if you have a Force Auxiliary, you're able to keep that fleet alive longer. You're able to fight longer and fight harder. And until your enemy force is able to destroy your Force Auxiliaries, you have a huge ability to mitigate damage by having FAXes on field. They really have changed the shape of combat in the game in nearly every area of space. Even in high sec, because fleets that would otherwise go roaming into low and null, if they're facing off against FAXes, and the same is true in wormholes. if you have FAXes in the space, or if you have more FAXes than the other guy, you de facto control that area. And it is as big an impact to the gameplay as the Citadels, as Astra Houses and Fortizars and Keepstars. Is if you don't have one, you have the other. And if you have both, well, you own that space no matter what the sovereignty says. So it is a big change to the game. It's a big benefit to the game in some ways. It's created some really interesting gameplay. But it's important for you to understand, if you're returning to the game now, or if you're looking back on the history of the game, the Force Auxiliary really changed the face of combat in EVE. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching through it. I'm sorry it's taken so long to record it. You guys can look forward to additional videos from this series and others coming out very soon. Thank you so much for sticking with me. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up. If you want to see more of my videos, go ahead and smash that subscribe button. Thank you so much for supporting me. If you want to talk with me, or if you have questions you want to ask me directly, please feel free to throw questions in the comment section below or join my Discord. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great day. I'm Jurius Doctor.